Little girl's unexpected move saved a CEO from instant death. Ethan Walker stepped out of his luxury SUV with the air of someone who believed the world should adjust its rhythm to his pace. His shoes gleamed from a morning polish, his wristwatch ticked in silent precision, and his tailored navy suit clung to his frame like armor. He was the kind of man who measured time in profit margins and considered human connection a liability. Today, however, he stood outside the Sunrise Children's Shelter, not from compassion, but from obligation. His marketing team had insisted this visit would boost the company's image. "Show the people you're human, Ethan," they said. "Smile, shake hands, hug a child." He had laughed at that last part, but now here he was, awkwardly adjusting his blazer as he approached the front entrance with a forced smile. Inside, the smell of warm soup, pencil shavings, and distant laughter mixed in the hallway. Volunteers buzzed around with ease, offering friendly greetings he returned with half-hearted nods. A framed photo on the wall read, "Every child deserves a home," but Ethan barely glanced at it. His mind was elsewhere. Emails, phone calls, mergers. The only reason he was here was because the press might pick up a story. Ms. Rachel Thompson greeted him with calm eyes and the warmth of someone who had dedicated her life to mending broken hearts. "Mr. Walker," she said, shaking his hand, "thank you for coming." He nodded quickly. "Let's make this quick. I've got a call at 3. Rachel guided him through the shelter's modest rooms. Children played with board games. Others read books on faded couches. A little girl with braids offered him a drawing, which he took awkwardly before folding it in half and slipping it into his coat pocket without looking. After the short tour, Rachel led him to the exit. Just as they stepped onto the porch, she stopped. "Mr. Walker, if it's not too much, may I ask for a small favor?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of favor?" She glanced toward the parking lot. "Two of the girls, Lily and Ava, just came back from the market. Their ride fell through. Would you mind giving them a lift back to the shelter?" Ethan stared at her. "You want me to chauffeur children?" Rachel smiled gently. "It's just a short ride. They're very well behaved." He looked at his car, then back at her. "In that car?" She nodded. "It would really help." Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't make this a habit." Rachel waved toward a shaded bench. Two small girls stood up. Lily, age 8, with bright, curious eyes and a canvas tote in her hand, and Ava, age 6, gripping a threadbare teddy bear. They walked over slowly, hand in hand, unsure of what to say. "Hi," Lily offered sweetly. "Thank you for the ride, mister." Ethan gave a tight smile. "Let's go." He opened the door to his spotless SUV and gestured. The girls climbed in carefully, avoiding contact with the leather seats like they were made of glass. Rachel leaned in just before he started the engine. "Thank you again, Mr. Walker. It means more than you know." Ethan said nothing, just nodded sharply and drove off. The silence inside the car was thick. Lily looked out the window while Ava hugged her bear, legs swinging above the floor. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, annoyed by the unplanned errand and calculating how late he'd be to his next meeting. But something about the girl's quiet presence unnerved him, not in an irritating way, but in a way he didn't understand. He cleared his throat once, then said nothing. The air conditioning hummed gently. The car glided past traffic lights and busy streets, yet time felt oddly slow. Ava glanced at him once, then quickly turned away when he caught her. He adjusted his miroir, raw, pretending not to notice. Lily whispered something to her sister that he couldn't hear, and they both smiled softly. Ethan frowned and focused on driving. He didn't sign up for this. He didn't want to feel anything. And yet something subtle was already stirring, something he couldn't quite name. But to Ethan, this was just a minor detour, a simple favor, an inconvenience. He had no idea what fate had just begun writing in the background of that quiet ride. Ethan made a left onto Broadway, the familiar skyline rising ahead as downtown buzzed with life. Horns honked in the distance, people rushed past street corners, and the occasional vendor called out, offering snacks to hurried pedestrians. Inside the SUV, however, there was only silence. Lily gazed out the window, her reflection overlaying the buildings outside, while Ava still clutched her teddy bear tightly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The luxury vehicle cruised past high-rises and cafes, its engine barely making a sound, but a quiet tension had begun to fill the cabin. Ethan glanced once more in the rearview mirror, unsure why the silence now felt heavier than before. He adjusted the air conditioning, then the volume knob on the radio, only to turn it back down when he realized the static annoyed him. The girls hadn't said a word since getting in, and he was just a few blocks from dropping them off when Lily suddenly leaned forward in her seat, voice soft but startling. "Sir, could you please get out of the car?" Ethan's eyebrows shot up, his eyes meeting hers through the mirror. "What?" he asked, not sure he'd heard her right. Lily's expression was calm but oddly serious for a child her age. "Please," she said again. "Just get out of the car for a minute." He laughed, confused. "Is this a joke?" Ava looked up now, her small voice trembling as she added, "We don't know why, but something bad is going to happen. We can feel it." Ethan scoffed, but the sound came out thinner than he expected. "You feel it?" he repeated. "What are you, psychic?" The girls didn't answer. They just stared at him, innocent, wide-eyed, and strangely certain. The SUV rolled to a red light. Ethan tapped the steering wheel, clearly unsettled now. He wasn't a man who entertained nonsense, especially not cryptic warnings from 6-year-olds. But there was something unnerving in the way they looked at him, like they weren't playing, weren't pretending. Lily's hands were clenched into small fists in her lap. Ava looked as if she might cry, but she didn't say another word. Ethan glanced at the traffic light, then back at the mirror. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. He turned his signal on, preparing to change lanes toward the shelter. The girls didn't speak again, yet their silence screamed. His palms suddenly felt damp. There was a construction site up ahead. Scaffolding lined both sides of the street, with cranes moving slowly in the sky. For some reason, his eyes locked on a loose platform hanging above. Then Lily whispered again, "Please, mister, just for a second." Ethan's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. He hadn't even noticed. Without fully understanding why, he slowed the car down. His brain told him this was absurd, but his body disobeyed. He pulled to the side of the road, tires hissing softly against the pavement. "Fine," he snapped, more to silence the gnawing feeling in his chest than to agree. He threw the car into park, opened the door, and stepped out. The sidewalk felt hot beneath his shoes. He took 2 steps away from the car, rubbing his temples. "This is insane," he whispered, glancing around as if someone might be watching. Behind him, Lily and Ava remained in the back seat, watching him intently through the tinted windows. They didn't smile. They didn't relax. They just waited. Ethan turned his eyes toward the construction site again, something tightening in his chest, though he didn't know what it was. The breeze shifted slightly, and a faint metallic creak echoed from above, followed by a shout in the distance. The moment had arrived. But Ethan had no idea yet how close he was to death, or how those 2 little voices had just changed the path of his fate with one impossible request. Ethan had barely taken 3 steps from the curb when a sound, metal groaning under pressure, ripped through the air like a warning shot. In that split second, his instincts sharpened, heads snapping up just as a terrifying screech echoed from above. The world slowed. Workers on the scaffolding shouted, their voices distorted by the sudden surge of adrenaline pounding in Ethan's ears. And then, crash! The deafening impact exploded behind him. A steel beam the size of a telephone pole plummeted from the top of the half-constructed building, smashing directly onto the roof of his SUV with the force of a bomb. Glass burst in all directions, metal folded like paper. The back tires lifted off the ground for a moment before the vehicle settled into a mangled, smoking mess. Ethan spun around, his mouth slightly open, his heart pounding as if trying to escape his chest, his eyes locked onto the wreckage, his car, the one he had been sitting in seconds ago. There was no roof anymore, just shredded steel. The entire passenger side had caved in. If he had stayed even a few breaths longer, his skull would have been crushed like an eggshell. His knees nearly buckled at the thought. Dust filled the air, thick and choking, as people began to scream and scatter. A construction foreman ran toward the street, waving his arms, yelling for someone to call 911. But Ethan didn't hear him. All he could do was stare, frozen in place, his expensive shoes rooted to the concrete. His hands trembled at his sides, useless. For a man who always had control, who dictated boardroom outcomes and market trends, this was a moment of absolute helplessness. Then, through the swirling dust and debris, two small figures flung open the SUV's back door and bolted toward him. "Mr. Walker!" Lily's voice cracked through the chaos, panic and fear twisting her words. Ava's tiny arms wrapped around one of his legs as she cried, her face buried against his knee. Lily clutched the other, holding on as if he might vanish if she let go. "We thought you were still in there," Lily sobbed. "We thought—" But her voice broke. Ethan stood stiffly, not knowing how to react, the weight of the moment crashing down on him far harder than any beam could. His breathing came in short, shallow gasps. He looked down at the girls holding on to him, their innocence the only stable thing in the storm around him. He reached a hand out hesitantly, placing it on Lily's back, his fingers awkward and shaking. I'm okay," he whispered, though it didn't feel real. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. The crowd grew, phones came out, and people began recording the destroyed SUV from every angle. But none of that mattered. In Ethan's world, where logic ruled and everything had an explanation, this moment defied everything. He had listened to a feeling, a strange warning from two small girls, and now he was alive because of it. The thought almost made him dizzy. His eyes darted once more to the SUV, then to the beam now lying across it like a guillotine that had missed its target. The hood was folded in. The windshield shattered into glittering fragments. There was no seat left, just the twisted impression of what once had been. Lily and Ava were still holding on to him, sobbing quietly. He could feel Ava's tears soaking through his pant leg, could hear the tiny hiccups in Lily's breathing as she tried to calm down. People were rushing around them now, some offering help, others trying to make sense of what happened. A paramedic approached cautiously, asking if everyone was okay, but Ethan barely nodded. His gaze lingered on the crushed car as if it were some alien object he couldn't understand. What stunned him most wasn't the destruction. It was the timing. Not even a full minute. That's all it would have taken to end his life completely. He turned back to the girls, crouching down now, his knees still shaking as he placed a hand on each of their shoulders. You saved me," he said, his voice dry and hoarse. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening, and simply nodded. Ethan didn't know how or why they had known, but in that terrifying moment, there was no room for doubt. They had pulled him from death with nothing but instinct and love. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off every window and windshield on the street, casting chaotic shadows across Ethan's stunned face. Police tape fluttered in the breeze as officers took statements, directed traffic, and secured the site. Medics moved quickly, checking for injuries, asking questions he barely heard. Reporters had already arrived, microphones out, cameras rolling, feeding off the drama of a near-death moment involving a well-known CEO. But Ethan Walker wasn't focused on any of it. He sat quietly on the curb, just a few feet from the crushed remains of his vehicle, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands dangling loosely, his tie undone. He looked nothing like the man who had stepped into the shelter just hours ago, confident, impatient, untouchable. That man felt like a stranger now. His gaze was heavy as he turned to the girls beside him. Lily sat silently, arms wrapped around Ava, who leaned into her sister's side, still shaken but calm now, as if her body had finally processed the danger they'd escaped. He watched them for a long moment, his mind trying to fit their small, quiet presence into the narrative of what had just happened. It didn't add up. Logic failed him. "How?" he started, his voice barely audible. "How did you know?" Lily didn't respond right away. She looked down at the cracked pavement beneath her shoes, then up at the still hanging cranes in the sky. "Fina, Lily," she turned to him, her expression calm but sincere. "We just felt it," she said, "in our hearts. No explanation, no science, just a quiet truth spoken by a child." Ethan nodded slowly, as if the words were too simple to believe but too honest to ignore. Someone came to check on them again, but he waved them off. He wasn't injured, not physically, but something inside him had been pierced, deeply. After what felt like hours, he stood up and helped the girls into another car, one of his driver's backup vehicles that had just arrived. The ride back to the shelter was silent again, but not the same kind of silence as before. This one was full of unspoken emotion, of realization, of weight. Rachel met them at the door, panic in her eyes until she saw the girls unharmed. She pulled them into her arms, whispering thank yous between tearful breaths. Ethan stood to the side, watching the reunion, feeling like a man misplaced in someone else's story. He said little before leaving. He didn't need to. That night, Ethan returned to his penthouse apartment, a place of glass and stone, high above the noise of the city. Normally, the silence comforted him. It made him feel in control, but tonight, it rang hollow. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at the floor. The drink remained untouched in his hand. Around him, every object was polished, expensive, cold. The view from the window stretched across the city skyline, glittering like something out of a brochure. Yet none of it mattered now. His mind played it over and over, the beam crashing down, the shattering glass, the moment his life was spared by two little girls he hadn't even wanted in his car. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to make sense of it. But no numbers, no logic, no charts could explain what had happened. He thought about Lily's words. "We just felt it in our hearts." And then something inside him cracked, slowly, quietly. His shoulders sank, his chest tightened, and for the first time in years, Ethan Walker cried. Not the kind of tears that came from pain, but the kind that came from awakening, from guilt, from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that he'd been given a second chance, not by fate or by luck, but by love, pure and undeserved. The tears fell freely, soaking into his dress shirt. And in that moment, Ethan wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man, broken open by kindness and changed forever. The morning sun broke through the tall windows of Ethan Walker's penthouse, casting golden streaks across the marble floor, but he didn't notice. His suit jacket hung untouched on the back of a chair, his phone buzzed with unanswered messages, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care. The world could wait. Today, something far more important called to him. He picked up his car keys and headed out the door with no entourage, no chauffeur, no media alerts. The streets felt different beneath his wheels, not because the city had changed, but because he had. When he arrived at Sunrise Shelter, there were no reporters, no flashing cameras, no PR team trailing behind, just him, standing alone at the door of the very place that had unknowingly saved his life. The front door creaked slightly as he opened it. The familiar warmth of the building greeted him, the soft smell of oatmeal, the faint hum of cartoons playing in the background, and children's voices rising and falling like music. He walked through the hallway, every step slower than the last, not from hesitation but from reverence. When Ms. Rachel turned the corner and saw him, she blinked in surprise. "Mr. Walker," she said, setting down the basket of folded laundry she carried. "You came back." Ethan nodded, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with you, privately." She led him into her small office, a room lined with thank you notes, coloring pages, and a shelf of second-hand books. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood still for a moment before stepping toward the doorway again. "Actually," he murmured, "I'd like the girls to hear this too." Rachel's eyebrows lifted, but she simply nodded. Minutes later, Lily and Ava entered the room hand in hand, their steps slow, unsure. They froze when they saw Ethan. Ava's teddy bear was clutched tight, and Lily tilted her head slightly, curious but quiet. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ethan slowly knelt before them, his expensive trousers pressed against the shelter's old wooden floor as he looked into their eyes, serious, vulnerable, and full of something rare in his world, humility. "I don't have the right words," he began, voice low, "but I know what I feel, and I know what I want to offer." The girls stayed silent, listening. "You gave me something yesterday that no amount of money could ever buy. You gave me life," he continued. "And today, I want to give you something in return. If you'll let me." His voice trembled slightly. "I'd like to be your father." Lily's mouth fell open, and Ava gasped softly, her teddy dropping to the floor. Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering instantly. "I don't want this to be a visit," Ethan said. "I want it to be forever. A real home. A real family." The silence that followed was sacred. Then Lily lunged forward, throwing her arms around his neck with a laugh that burst like sunlight. Ava followed, crashing into him with such force that he nearly lost balance. They clung to him, sobbing and smiling all at once, as if their small bodies couldn't contain so much joy. Ethan wrapped his arms around them, eyes closed, the scent of childhood and safety filling his chest in a way no perfume or penthouse ever had. Rachel wiped her tears quietly, nodding as though witnessing something divine. Papers would be signed later, calls would be made, but that moment, those arms around his neck, was the only confirmer he needed. Hours later, the girls packed their few belongings into cardboard boxes, giggling as they tried to carry them together. Ethan didn't let them. He carried it all himself. The teddy bear rode tucked into his back pocket. As they stepped out of the shelter doors for the last time, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in a golden hue. Ava asked, "Do we get to ride in your car again?" Ethan smiled and held the door open like a chauffeur. "Every day," he replied. As the car drove off, 2 new booster seats sat in the back, hand-picked by Ethan himself. No assistants, no staff, just a man and his daughters, heading home for the first time. A new name would be printed soon on official forms. Lily Walker, Ava Walker. But their hearts already knew the truth. The family they had dreamed of was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it had finally come to take them home. The driveway gates opened slowly, revealing the grand estate that once stood as a cold monument to Ethan Walker's ambition. But as the sleek black car rolled in with 2 small girls bouncing excitedly in the back seat, that estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a fresh page waiting to be filled. The butler opened the door and blinked in surprise as Lily and Ava burst out, running straight into the marble-floored foyer with gleeful laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. Ethan followed with a gentle smile, carrying 2 pink backpacks and a teddy bear that now had a small bow tied around its neck. The massive chandelier above them still sparkled, but beneath it 2 small girls twirled as if the grand house was a ballroom built just for them. In the days that followed, walls that once displayed abstract art were now adorned with crayon drawings and finger paint masterpieces. His minimalist furniture made way for fluffy beanbags, dollhouses, and books with unicorns on the covers. Evenings no longer ended in spreadsheets, but in story time, where Ethan's once imposing voice now softened to silly character impressions that sent Lily into giggles and Ava into fits of hiccuping laughter. Every morning, the scent of cinnamon waffles replaced the sterile aroma of coffee and silence. Ethan began to wake up before his alarm, just to make sure breakfast was ready before the girls tumbled down the stairs in their pajamas. The house staff, once stiff and distant, warmed under the girls' innocent charm, often staying longer than their shifts just to join in tea parties or help with school projects. At work, something shifted too. The man who once silenced boardrooms with a single glare now kept a framed photo of Lily and Ava beside his laptop. During tense meetings, he would glance at it, not to escape, but to remember why any of it mattered. His priorities had changed. Deadlines remained, but so did dance recitals. He began leaving early. Meetings ended at 5:30 sharp. "Dad duty," he would say with a grin, and no one questioned it. Then came the idea, the foundation. Quietly, without ceremony, he formed the Lily Ava Trust, designed to provide funding, resources, and emergency housing for underfunded shelters across the country. He never made a public announcement, never claimed credit. The impact spoke for itself. Shelters in small towns that were close to closing suddenly received checks large enough to stay open for years. When asked why, the administrators only smiled and pointed to the signature at the bottom of the letter, in honor of 2 little girls who saved a life. As months turned into a year, the memory of the accident never faded. It became something sacred. Every August 17th, Ethan took the day off, no matter what. He, Lily, and Ava would visit a quiet garden they had planted in the backyard. Roses for Lily, sunflowers for Ava, and a single oak tree with a plaque beneath it that read, "The day everything changed." They would sit under that tree together, sometimes sharing stories, sometimes just listening to the wind. And every year, as the sun began to set, Ethan would wrap his arms around them both and whisper softly, as if speaking to the universe through them, "You didn't just save my life. You gave me a reason to live it." Lily always smiled. Ava always squeezed his hand tighter. The pain of that day had turned into purpose, and the emptiness he once carried had become a home filled with light. Life moved on, but the bond they shared only deepened. From PTA meetings to dance rehearsals, from sleepless nights with fevers to birthday parties with balloon animals, Ethan was there for it all. And through it all, he never once forgot the lesson that rewrote his entire life. Love doesn't ask for profit. It doesn't calculate returns. It shows up, unexpected and unexplainable. And when it does, it saves more than a life. It saves a soul. In the end, Ethan Walker wasn't remembered for the towers he built, the deals he closed, or the wealth he amassed. He was remembered as the man who knelt before 2 children and asked to be their father, and in doing so finally became the man he was always meant to be.